this evening, Erev Tov. So the class, Israel's History Through Poetry, will begin in just a moment. And for those online, sorry for the delay. Julian, before you sit, would you mind passing the packet out for everybody?
Well, mine are too. Even getting his senior portrait team.
All right. If you're staying for the class, come on in.
Richard, you said.
Okay. Yeah, I saw it to the Fediments. Yeah, it's okay. I had extras, as you see. All right, folks, thanks for... Bye. Okay, so for a few weeks ago, and back in April, as Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, approached, we had a couple of special services, which meant that from 9:30 to 10:15 on Shabbat morning, I was able to do an extended Torah study. So we really began the class then by looking at two poems, one by Chaim Nachman Bialik from back in the old country, back in the Ukraine, where he was at the Volozhin Yeshiva, dreaming about going to Israel. So his poem, To the Bird, El Hatzipor, was kind of like the poem for the Zionist movement. It was almost a Zionist anthem. And then we also looked at the following week, a poem that was written a couple days after the partition plan was passed in the United Nations. That was a poem by Natan Alterman called The Silver Platter, or Magash HaKesef, which kind of reflected what the land of Israel was like from Theodore Herzl to 1947, namely settlers coming in, pioneers coming in, mainly from Europe, and mainly Eastern and Central Europe, escaping pogroms, persecution, oppression, and setting up in Israel mainly on kibbutzim, some in cities, and really establishing what would be the foundation for the state of Israel. And that meant fighting the British Mandate and fighting in a way to allow so-called illegal immigrants, illegal because the British set up a quota as to how many immigrants can come in. So it was illegal in that, from a Jewish perspective, it doesn't seem illegal. It's our right to return to our homeland. But we had to follow the laws, and the laws were, as administered by the League of Nations at the time in 1917, when they gave the mandate to Britain to be in charge of Palestine, and France in charge of Lebanon and Syria to administer that area. So they administered it by prime ministers sending delegations to Israel and writing white papers that would be on behalf of the British government as to what the situation was like on the ground and what would be appropriate responses to deal with Arab-Jewish tension in the land of Israel, and also what to do about immigration. So there were these illegal immigrants so that the Jewish underground arranged boats would kind of be offshore at night, and somehow the passengers on the boats would be brought into Israel, hopefully not caught by the British authorities. So that was Magash HaKesef, the Silver Platter. Now, what I want to do is, it's so hard to distill 70 years of Israeli history in 2 nights, which we essentially have, because what would have been the 3rd night is the congregation meeting. And so a great resource that I've been using, and I've been learning as 2 steps ahead of teaching you, is from my teacher, one of my teachers at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Her name is Rachel Korazim. She's a brilliant educator. Her field is Hebrew literature. She mainly taught in high school and teachers' colleges in Israel, and she's really, really wonderful. I was never one to understand poetry, and that having to do a paper on imagery in a poem was not my thing. To have me do a paper on the history of something, or what the halachic implications of such and such would be, that I would do a little bit better on. Poetry was not my thing. But Rachel Korazim made poetry understandable to me in the years that I was at the Hartman Institute, and she's currently teaching a class for alumni of the Hartman Institute, for rabbis, on this, Israel at 70, through the eyes of contemporary Israeli literature. And so I'm really stealing material from her, the material that I handed out in class, and it's available on my blog. On the right side of my blog, there's a link to this material as well. I've stolen from her website, rachelkorazim.com. Rachel being Rachel, Korazim. So Rachel Korazim, one word, .com. Her website is this exact thing, and it has a variety of resources for the decades of 7 decades of Israel's existence. Right now, she only has 3 decades. So don't sell the material, and about using it, giving it to you and using it in this kind of class, I think we're okay legally doing that. Anybody watching or then using the recording in some other fashion, they would be violating copyright law. So hopefully I'm not going to be sued for copying. All the material, though, is the poems that I've copied from her website, from PDFs that are there on the website. Those are all in the public domain anyway. Okay, so the poems I want to do tonight, in the hour that we have, or a little bit less, reflect a couple elements that have happened over the course of Israel's history. So what I want to start with is that from 1948 through the 1950s, is construction of housing in Israel in no way kept pace with the floodgates opening up of Jewish refugees entering Israel. So once the state of Israel was established and then the war was over in 1949, then what we had was, I'm just looking for this other material that I've had here, were essentially refugee camps, or what would be known as transit camps. And so we have, there was one other piece of, maybe you have it, no? Here it is. Here it is. Sorry. This is the material I wanted. Got mixed up with all these papers here. Okay. there were a number of transit camps that Israel had set up throughout Israel to house these immigrants, what they thought were temporarily, and the temporarily would be, even for some of them, several years. So imagine what you see today, that for the Syrian refugees, what is set up in Jordan, what might be set up for the Rohingya refugees from Burma or Myanmar in Bangladesh, transit camps like that, which are big tents and are, at least the ones in Jordan, and I think in some places in Turkey as well, are a little bit more organized and as well built as a tent community can be. So that was a little bit what it was like in the late 40s and all of the 50s in Israel. So it was the technology as best as it could be in the 1950s compared with the technology as best as it is in 2018. You would imagine it might be a little bit more comfortable to live in that tent temporarily today than it would be back in the 50s in Israel. In the heat, in the rain, sometimes tin shacks, sometimes tents. It was a mishmash of people, Jews coming in from Arab countries, because Arabs were technically still at war with Israel, even though they achieved a ceasefire or a halting of hostilities, which is 1 degree below that, in 1949. So if the Arab countries are at war with Israel, technically, then the Jews in those Arab countries would be considered Israeli citizens in the eyes of the Arab government of those countries. And so life there was not so good anymore for Jews in those Arab countries. That's why you have a lot of Egyptian Jews leaving Egypt in the 1960s, especially after the Six-Day War in 1967. So we have, our congregation has 2 Egyptian Jewish families in it. My congregation before this one in Massachusetts had 2 or 3 Egyptian Jewish families that all left Egypt in the 60s, went to France first. For some reason, the Jews went to French private schools in Egypt, and so then they went to France for a couple months, and then if they had relatives here in America, it was easier for them to come to America. So, so you have Jews from Arab countries who are known as Sephardim, or even in Hebrew called Mizrahi, which means Eastern. So imagine the map of the Middle East. That's not the case that most Arab countries are to the east of Israel. You still have North Africa, but they come under the rubric of Mizrahi. And then you have the Europeans escaped refugees from the Holocaust. And so you have all these people coming into Israel. And this first poem that we have here by the singer Chava Alberstein is called Shar Aliyah. So it's one word in the Hebrew, but really it's a compound of 2 Hebrew words, Sha'ar Aliyah, meaning the gate of Aliyah. And so she writes about this transit camp that got the name Sha'ar Aliyah, the gateway to immigration or becoming a citizen of Israel. So just a little bit of background, Sha'ar Aliyah is a real place. Was one of the largest transit camps for new immigrants. It was located at the southern entrance to Haifa. So Haifa is on the northern coast of Israel. It's the major port of Israel. So just south of Haifa is where this transit camp was. During the first year of its activities, over 100,000 people passed through its gates. 100,000 Jews. Mainly European Holocaust survivors and immigrants from Muslim countries. The literal meaning of the name is Gate of Immigration. Most immigrants, however, had pronounced it as one distorted, meaningless word, Shar Aliyah. Okay, Chava Alberstein was born in that transit camp. No, I'm sorry, she was not. She was raised in that transit camp. She was born in 1947 in Poland. parents had survived the Holocaust. And she was born in 1947, made Aliyah with her parents in 1953 to this transit camp. And she had spent several years in this transit camp. So she writes this poem about what life was like in that transit camp. So this is an important element of Israeli history, understanding these ma'abarot, as they were known in Hebrew. I pressed the button for the air conditioning. It did not go on. So these ma'abarot are a fixture of the 50s and the early 60s in Israel, and everybody knew about them. So she writes, this story begins at the end. A passenger ship berthed at dock. Weary people in a new land stand before a large gate, gazing up in silence. People from the ends of time, from the ends of light and life, with thick garments and heavy steps. Right? They come with their winter coats, or whatever they have with them, coming to Israel to a desert climate. And let's say, especially if they're coming in the summertime, they're certainly overdressed. Nothing is like what they promised. They promised a warm land, but it's windy and stormy. The roof flew off in winter. Pots covered the floor. Everything was sodden with water, the down quilts from Poland. Everyone was sobbing, but I was already asleep, like a real princess, asleep with an umbrella, right? So now the other idea here is, Israeli representatives were in Europe trying to get people to make Aliyah. So in other words, you're a survivor of the Holocaust. Where are you going to go? You can't go back home because your home isn't there anymore in Poland and Russia or wherever.
Somebody else is living there.
So somebody else is living there, or it was bombed. It's not safe to go back because we do know that Polish Jews did go back to some towns in Poland and there was a pogrom. So it's not safe to go back to your home country if you're a survivor of the Holocaust. So you're in a DP camp, displaced persons camp, which there are several around Europe after the war. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go to a new country, which in 1945 is not a country yet? And then once you're in the DP camp, you're waiting there, trying to figure out what you're going to do. State of Israel's established, hallelujah. But then they're at war. Are you going to go? A lot did. A lot did go to Israel and say, you know what? I survived the Holocaust. I'm going to fight for Israel. And I'm going to make Aliyah, and this will give me meaning to live. Others will say, you know what? I've had enough of fighting. I've suffered enough. I got family in Canada or in America or in Australia or in South Africa. I'm going to go there. So most of the Jews went to other countries. Some went to Israel, and that's why Israeli reps were in these DP camps, try to bring people to Israel. So they're going to propaganda. Oh, it's great in Israel. It's always warm here. Never rains, blah, blah. And that's what she's writing about. They promised a warm land, but it's winter. It's windy and stormy. The roof flew off in winter. Pots covered the floor. Everything was sodden in water. And then the down quilts from Poland, right? We brought back our heirlooms, and they're all ruined here in Israel. Someone says, we're here. Another answers, perhaps. Someone calls, we found it. Others whisper, if only. Someone shouts, in the meantime. They shout back, until when? We'll never know who came in and who went out, who passed through and who remained in Shar Aliyah. Kol Tzion LaGolah, Israel radio broadcast to the diaspora. Every hour in another language, the radio says, right? So Israel radio would broadcast in a variety of languages. Some people learned Hebrew by listening to the radio, but Israel radio had an English station, had Russian, had Polish, you name the languages, Israel radio would broadcast in those languages because of all these immigrants coming to Israel. Every hour in another language. The radio plays, sitting like deportees in the underground as if warming by a stove, understanding every word, singing along with the songs. Right? It was a way to bring people together, to escape your misery. The news would, there would be beep, 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 and then the news on the top of the hour, and then there's music and whatnot afterwards. In the morning, returning to the new language, it breaks the teeth, hard and indifferent. All your plans have become dreams. Change your profession, change your name, change your memories, embellish the past. Over there, everyone was a prince, and this is what remains. A piano in every room, stables in the yard. Every word is the absolute truth, more or less. Right? So imagine sitting in these tents and reminiscing about what life was like in Europe before the war. Oh, we were so wealthy then. We owned a store, a department store, a piano in every room, servants, maids, half-truths. Some certainly there were wealthy Jews before the war, but not everybody was wealthy. So they're gathered around telling these stories, and right, and you're breaking your teeth over this new language. Once again, the radio searching for relatives, long lists, names, addresses, numbers. Those who changed their names have given up. They no longer listen to the program. They are weary. Meanwhile, my father bought a camera. 5-minute photos, pictures for certification, Aliyah certificate, ID certificate, certificate of membership. We have no language, no livelihood, but with a certificate, we'll manage. This is a real thing, that's searching for relatives. So imagine this. You survived the Holocaust. You have no idea if you have family members alive. You go to Israel. You think maybe there are family members who made it to Israel too. The radio would broadcast, Saul Cohen is here in Haifa. He's looking for his relatives. If you know Saul Cohen, if he's a relative of yours, give him a call. Julian Liedman is living in Rishon LeZion. He survived. He's from this community in, I don't know, the Ukraine or something. He's here searching for relatives. Imagine every single day the radio would broadcast these names and addresses. And the problem is some people, when they make Aliyah, change their name. So now Saul Cohen wouldn't change his name because there's nothing to change Cohen. But Liedman, you might change your name because that sounds too European. You want something Israeli, something new. So David Ben-Gurion, Shimon Peres. Ben-Gurion and Peres were not there. Born, they weren't the names that they were born with. David Ben-Gurion was David Green. Shimon Peres, what was Peres's name? Persky or something like that, right? To make it Israeli sounding, Hebrew. So that's what she's talking about here. Wait a second, I changed my name. What was my name before? Or maybe this person already changed their name and announcing their new name. How are they going to find their relatives? So imagine the frustration of people trying to find their relatives in Israel. But this is something that Rachel Korazim herself remembers. She's a child of Hungarian refugees, and she remembers listening to the radio at this time, and there are stories written about this as well. In the heat of summer, we bring out chairs. The Hasbara, the propaganda or advocacy center, brings films and lectures, and accordion plays accompanying some singer, Agala im Susa, Oi Oi, Kineret, Kineret. Folding bed, folding table. Friday evening, we go for a walk. White shirts, shined shoes. We go for a walk, but there's nothing to see. Rows of shutters, a few trees, and a fence. We return slowly, no need to hurry. This story begins at the end. The tale of a ship that reached the shore, the transit camp, the final stage, Bulgarian, Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew, a great place with no color, no scenery, and the beginning, a beginning with no end. Someone says, we're here. Another answers, perhaps. Someone calls, we found it. Others whisper, if only. Someone shouts, in the meantime. They shout back, until when? We'll never know who came in and who went out, who passed through and who remained in Shar Aliyah. So, you know, we look back at Israel's history, and we look back on it with lots of nostalgia. But here, the purpose of the poetry is to bring some reality and respond to what it was actually like. And living in the internment, these transit camps was no picnic. And so that's what she writes about here. Any thoughts or comments about this before? Yes, Marie.
When I think of Bialik's poem, which was so beautiful with the bird approaching his window.
Yes.
And he's almost like a prisoner and the bird is free.
Right.
He was in Yeshiva, right? But he was in a land that was not good.
Right.
The bird symbolized the freedom of Israel or Zion.
Right. Right.
And so he had that longing. And so it's really a very stark image of the freedom of the bird, with him almost as a prisoner. Here, and you compare it with this, and this
Right.
is what it turned into.
This is what it turned
It's
into.
so sad.
That's right. Now,
It's so sad.
so what Marie is suggesting about comparing the To the Bird by Chaim Nachman Bialik, this dream of what Israel could be like, and tell me about how beautiful the land of Israel is, O bird, sing to me the songs. And here's what it turned out to be. Now, that's necessarily the case before the state of Israel was established, but still, it was hard work, working in the kibbutzim, establishing communities, building the infrastructure. Yeah, it was not a picnic. It was absolutely not a picnic. So,
when we were reading this poem, I see the parallels of any refugee
right.
to a new land. And I have stories in our family where people actually said, I thought this was America had golden streets.
Right, exactly. The Golden of Medina. Right.
Here I had come across, I had to go to Hamburg, and then I had to stay there for
right,
a while,
right.
I had to come to America, and then I had to find a landsman, and then I had to
right.
find a job. It's the same
kind of thing about so the Zionist dream that here we finally have a new Israel, and it's not what it's cracked up to be. And then if you're more religious, the haftorahs that we read every Shabbat are all about Israel in the Messianic era. Elijah's going to come, bring the Messiah. It's going to be a time of peace and tranquility. So some people are thinking that with the establishment of the state of Israel, this is the Messianic era. And it's not. It's living with mud and leaky roofs and trying to make a living, trying to, for the Israeli government to put you in a better house. All of that, it's not the time of the Messiah. It's not the Golden of Medina. It's not anything like that. So, yes. So that's a good question. So she's harking back to those days, but
6 to 10.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I don't know when she wrote it. Was it shortly after she started writing songs? Was it a long time after she started writing songs? I don't know.
Did she write a follow-up?
She's written lots of songs. She's one of the famous. She's like the Janis Joplin or the Carly Simon of Israel. So she's like a folk singer, and from the 70s and the 80s. She's still alive, but she's not touring anymore. But she's like one voice of Israel.
Well, she and I are probably about the same age.
Oh, okay. She said she was born in 1947. There you go. There you go. The other poem that's on the next page now, there are different numbers on the bottom. This one says the facial features by Natan Alterman. This is a poem. Something else dramatic happened 1960-61 in Israel. Anybody know what that was? 1960-61 in Israel, something dramatic, momentous happened that David Ben-Gurion announced that this person was captured. Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was captured, brought to Israel. When he was brought to Israel in custody, David Ben-Gurion went on the radio and said, "We have Adolf Eichmann." Now, I just said refugees coming from Europe, survivors of the Holocaust. And you're hearing on the radio every day a list of names. Julian Liedman, looking for relatives in Israel. Moish Petoskey, looking for relatives in Israel. That kind of thing. Every single day, David Ben-Gurion announces Adolf Eichmann is captured. Can you imagine the elation in Israel? And imagine the feelings that then come to the surface once again, right? Because once Eichmann is captured, then he has to be put on trial. What is that trial going to be like? Who are the witnesses? Who's going to be called as a witness? Who's going to be the prosecution representing the state of Israel, representing all the Jews of the world in prosecuting Adolf Eichmann? So Israel's Attorney General, Gideon Hausner was his name, was the one in charge of prosecuting the case. So whatever was leading up to it, lots of stuff in the newspapers, on the radio, just about what this is like to face our history, to now be in a position to put our enemy on trial. Never before in the history of the Jewish people have the Jewish people been able to put their enemy on trial. Couldn't put the Emperor of Rome on trial for the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Couldn't put the Pope on trial for allowing the Crusades, for fostering the Crusades across Europe. Couldn't put Hitler on trial. He committed suicide, right? You can't put the Bolsheviks, the Cossacks on trial for all the pogroms, right? You get the point. This is the first time that we could put the enemy on trial, so all of the Holocaust embodied by Adolf Eichmann, right? So now imagine what Israel is going through and watching. Everybody was mesmerized watching TV, watching the live proceedings of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, watching the witnesses and crying every day, listening to their testimonies, right? And seeing tattoos on people's arms. Now, you saw tattoos on people's arms before, but now the whole country is watching this happen. This is what Natan Altman is writing in response to that. We had all known that walking among us were people from that world. So it's not written like a poem, but it is a poem. It's just the way Rachel Karazim put it here. Would stumble over them daily, in the street, in the offices we got into for our business, at workshops, in stores at the market, and during meetings, on the arm of a clerk who would hand us a form through a window, on the forearm of a craftsman bent over his tools, on the arm of a cashier who was handing us our change on the bus. Suddenly, from time to time, a little higher than the wrist, the bluish tattooed number would appear, right? Everyday activities are not everyday activities in Israel because you're reminded of the Holocaust every single day. You just want to buy a loaf of bread? The clerk handing you the loaf of bread has a tattoo on his arm. The butcher, a tattoo on her arm, right? So you're seeing this every single day. So life in Israel is a surreal kind of life because the people are so, you're going about your business, but you're talking Hebrew, going about your business. So, right? So when I went to Israel the first time with my family, I was 6 years old, just kind of blown away by everybody speaking Hebrew when I was just learning Hebrew in day school. And my parents were just like ecstatic because my father, being a rabbi, everybody from his class in rabbinical school and a couple years before, a couple years after, starting to make Aliyah. So he got the bug, and that was 1968 that I went for the first time. 1969, we attempted Aliyah for the first time. So going about our business in Israel, going to the store and using Hebrew from the Bible to buy a loaf of bread or a piece of cheese, it's just really wow. So that just by itself is wow. But then if the clerk that you're buying it from has a tattoo on his arm, whoa. Right? So it's just not everyday kind of this, wow, this is why Israel exists. So that a person with a tattoo on his arm can be a clerk in a supermarket. Right? Because where else would that person with a tattoo on his arm could possibly go? So the number that became part of the pale blue texture of the veins, the long pale number that is never erased. We knew that there were among us men and women of that other world. But it seems that only during that horrible, exalted trial, as the witnesses from there continued to step on the podium, one by one, those separate entities of foreign, anonymous people who had passed us by countless times merged together in our minds until we clearly understood that these entities are more than details put together. We might not have paid attention to these people before. Every now and then you come and run into somebody with a tattoo, but now it's constantly in your face. You realize that over there is now here, and you understand it that much better. They are a basic, resolute essence whose character and image and scary memories beyond life and nature are an undeletable part of the character and image of the people we belong to. So, Natan Altman, who wrote that poem in 1947 called The Silver Platter, who himself had made Aliyah in the 1920s, right? So there is that sense. Jews who got out of Europe way before World War II, and Jews who did not get out of Europe, right? So it could be Natan Altman's relatives who could have died in the Holocaust, but it's still over there because we're over here. And now it's all of us. So any thoughts or comments about this?
What does he call the facial feature?
The facial features, I guess, because he's watching where all of Israel is watching these witnesses on the give their testimony, and you can imagine the camera focusing on the face, and it's just the face then. So, and the face, and those faces are us. So, yeah. Any other thoughts or comments about this one? So, transit camps, and yeah, go ahead, Marie.
It's just so sad.
Yes.
Even though they've got this freedom and a new life, the Holocaust never really.
The Holocaust never. That's right.
This is very, very.
And the Holocaust, you think in Israel should be? We're beyond that. We're new Israel, new life for the Jews now. But no, we're being reminded day after day, listening to this testimony, that it's, even though it's over there, it's us. He says us several times in this poem. That is us. And that we have to recognize as Ashkenazi Jews, as Sephardi Jews, that this is all us that we're watching. And it becomes part of who we are as a country.
Yeah, well, not only that, but it's Jews all over the world. Like when you see a Jew do something wrong, like in New York State,
right?
You feel like you did it.
Right.
It
well,
makes your people look bad. Yeah.
So what Saul is saying is, I think, more a generational thing. So I know. So my parents always, when anybody with a Jewish sounding name is on the news for a bad thing, Shanda for the Goyim. Right? What are the non-Jews are going to think about us? It's a travesty. It's a shame for what people are going to think about us. So I that's inbred in me. So I look at names and see, oh, is that person Jewish or not? And that's what I think of. But I'm not sure Jews today, younger Jews, millennials and younger, think that way. I think they just think of people, and then so it's not a sense of that. Ooh. I feel guilty for that person, or, like Trump's lawyer, the fixer, Mike Cohen. So I think, oh, what kind of job is that for a nice Jewish boy? Okay, well, it's short.
And the other guy who commented was like Rosenberg.
Right. So yes, so that's what I think. Who are these Jewish people? What kind of Jewish upbringing do they have that they get involved in shady kind of activities?
See, I always feel when I hear all these people with Jewish sounding names,
right?
I feel like, oh, now they're going to say we're taking over the world.
Right. So there's that element too, because we're still there's a generations of Jews who always are looking over their shoulder, because you never feel comfortable. You can never feel comfortable wherever you live. Now. Right. But I think that younger Jews in America don't feel that way. Now, anti-Semitism is on the rise in America, and racism and against lots of other minorities on the rise. But I still don't think young Jews today feel as if they have to look over their shoulder, as if their safety in America is at risk. I don't think they think of it that way. But imagine Jews all over the world before 1945 were all looking over their shoulder. Because if it could happen in the most civilized country in the world, in Germany, a Holocaust can happen. It can happen anywhere, and we're never at home. So here in Israel, we are at home, but it's a transit camp. It's no fun. You have the Holocaust brought back to life with the capture of Adolf Eichmann and the trial, and you have war with your neighbors, Arab countries who don't want you to be there. So let's get into the other poems that we have here in the packet, which are from the third decade. Which are from well, some are from just around the end of the second decade of 1967-68, the Six-Day War, and a little bit after. So here are a couple of poems that are a response to the Six-Day War. And I want to look at this Natan Alterman poem, which says the second decade challenges. So here's this page. The meaning of this victory, 1967, is not only that it restored to the Jewish people its most ancient and most exalted sacred entities, those that are engraved above all others in its memory and in the depth of its history. The meaning of this victory is that it had practically erased the difference between the land of Israel and the state of Israel. So, meaning in 1967, before June 1967, the state of Israel was at one point only 9 miles wide from the coast to where the West Bank begins. Okay, where the West Bank begins today, that's that 9 mile strip. That was Israel. Everything else was administered by Jordan. Okay, Jerusalem. You had half of the city of Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, where the U.S. Embassy is being built, is West Jerusalem, not East Jerusalem. So Israel always had West Jerusalem. Read the op-ed by the former American ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, today to kind of highlight that. Don't think that the U.S. Embassy is being built in East Jerusalem and forgetting about any claim Palestinians have to East Jerusalem. It's in West Jerusalem, and there was this barrier down the heart of Jerusalem, and the old city was in Jordan. So you couldn't get to the Kotel from 1947 until 1967. You could not get to the Kotel to pray. You could try, but you'd be shot by Jordanian snipers. Okay, and you didn't have the Sinai Peninsula. And you didn't have all this territory. That's the West Bank. In 1967, we pleaded with people to stay out, but they didn't stay out of the conflict. So once they entered the conflict, then we conquered Jerusalem. We got the whole West Bank. We got the whole Sinai Peninsula. So that's what this means, that the land of Israel has become the state of Israel, right? Everything that's in the Bible that had been part of the kingdom of Israel is now part of the state of Israel as conquered territory. This is the first time, I'm continuing, since the destruction of the Second Temple, that we have the land of Israel in our hands. The state and the land are now one entity. He who will want to return these parts of the land will have to write a new Tanakh, a new Bible. Now, I want to read this poem, and I want to see what you think this poem is about. So this is a response to 1967, the Six-Day War, and acquiring all this territory. Then Satan said, how will I overcome this one who is under siege? He possesses bravery, ingenuity, weapons of war, and resourcefulness. And he said, I'll not sap his strength. That is, Satan said, I'll not sap his strength, nor fill his heart with cowardice, nor overwhelm him with discouragement as in days gone by. I will only do this. I will cast a shadow of dullness over his mind until he forgets that justice is with him. This is what the Satan said, and it was as if the heavens trembled in fear as they saw him rise to execute his plan. Read it again to yourself and tell me what you think this poem is about. Do you think this is a keep the settlements poem or a give up the settlements poem? Any thoughts? Yes, Saul.
I see it in what I know today.
Yes.
And this was written a long time ago.
Yeah, this was written in 1967.
That Israel will not allow the settlements. I'm talking about will not allow, Satan is behind Israel, and they will not allow the Arabs to stay there. That's how I see it.
So
it's a way to deal with Satan, and Satan is on our side. The people who are living there out. It's sort of like a J Street argument.
You're saying this is a J Street argument, that we should be giving up the settlements, that that dullness has gone over our mind, that we forget that justice is with us. And justice being giving the settlements back and making peace with the Palestinians.
That's my vision.
That's how I read the poem as well. And then this is how Rachel Korazim understands this, and this is how this poem is understood in Israel at the time and still understood today. By 1967, Natan Altman holds the status of national poet. So he was born in 1910, he died in 1970. His work covers volumes of poetry, lyrical, personal, national, and journalistic. He's a master of translations of world literature into Hebrew. He authored plays and children's books, wrote lyrics for popular songs, as well as learned articles. When the Six-Day War was over, Altman published an article that articulated his awe in front of the new reality, right? Lots of people felt that way, and you had lots of people around the world supporting Israel. Wow, how did David beat Goliath? That's amazing. The short paragraph we are reading out of a much longer text brings to light the main argument presented as a total truth. The war was a game changer, and the significance of the victory is loud and clear. Anyone who thinks otherwise is negating the core of our existence, the Bible. That's the paragraph that I read that's here on the page before the poem. Remember, the writer is a non-observant Jew. The grand majority of his readership are secular people, yet the argument is convincing and clear. Fluency in biblical lore in Israel at the time had nothing to do with one's level of observance. All Israeli Jews study the Bible and know its narratives well. Altman is not talking the language of observing a mitzvah. That's not his language. He's speaking the language of reading and loving the Bible and getting back to now having the entire land of Israel in our possession. Altman was one of the founders of the Movement for a Greater Israel and was an active member until his death in 1970. After the Six-Day War, there were some who said we have to give the land back. We want it, but we need to give it back to make peace. Others were arguing, and most people said, keep the land, we'll administer the land, and Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, others allowed settlements to be built on those territories that we had conquered. It is after his death that the poem "And Satan Had Said" was found. So it wasn't published until after he died in 1970. It reads like the poet's last will to warn the people of Israel against the risks of not believing in our rightful ownership of all the land of Israel. The justice being dulled is the justice that we have the right to be in Israel, in Greater Israel, and don't let that thought be dulled. The meaning of this victory is not only that it restored to the Jewish people its most ancient, and then it's the paragraph that we have on this page. So in other words, she reads it, and the people of Israel read this poem differently than Saul and I read it. We're reading it in the eyes of 2018, trying to make peace with the Palestinians and what justice means for us. But justice for Natan Altman and all those who believed in Greater Israel was the justice of keeping the land and making Greater Israel the new state of Israel. So that's one thought to responding to the Six-Day War. Another is this poem on the next page by Dan Alma Gore. So, okay, just one second. Dan Alma Gore was born in 1935. He's a playwright, a poet, a translator, publicist, and the greatest expert of the history and development of Hebrew songs. His songs are loved and sung for many years by Israel's best musicians. He wrote this poem, My Jerusalem, in 1969, making sure to express a variety of voices about their Jerusalem, including a Palestinian voice, as well as those who have more pressing problems than the Western Wall and the unification of the city. So this is just one response now. Okay, we have now the entire city of Jerusalem. What does that mean to have the whole city? The peddler, I'm reading the poem now. The peddler from Maskeret Moshe had said, My Jerusalem. Maskeret Moshe, so I have footnotes in my teacher's edition, is a small Jerusalem neighborhood just across the street from the Ben Yehuda market. It was built towards the end of the 19th century with funds from Moses Montefiore. So the peddler from Maskeret Moshe had said, My Jerusalem, it's Machane Yehuda, that's the big market up Jaffa Road, at holiday eves, hummus by Rachmo, which you can buy in the shuk, and fish smells, a Shabbat of Papitas, famous hummus place with several branches in Jerusalem, and drivers' curses, laundry hanging over the road, and shower out of a bucket, right? When you're trying to save water, as people in Israel still do, and try to save electricity too. So this is one image of what Jerusalem is like, right? The peddlers, the Machane Yehuda, and the hummus, and Shabbat food. The cobbler from Katamon, which was an area of Jerusalem where Mizrahi Jews settled, had said, My Jerusalem, it's 7 years of rains in a transit camp. The projects with no stores, unlimited bus rides, movies at the Orion Theater on Shabbat. These Mizrahi immigrants, even though they came from traditional backgrounds, they're kind of secular in that way. They'll have Shabbos dinner, but then go out to the movies. Okay, the Orion Theater, I know I can picture the Orion Theater. I saw Tootsie at the Orion Theater when I was in Israel, my junior year of college. Okay, so yeah.
So, I thought businesses were closed on Shabbat.
No, but not at that time. Now all of them are, but apparently the Orion Theater showed movies on Shabbat. Katamon Gimel, which is the most Mizrahi of all, is also for me, my Jerusalem. Right? So you got the Ashkenazi settlers, the peddlers in Maskeret Moshe. You got the Mizrahi settlers in Katamon. This is what Jerusalem is. Said the Chassid from Mea Sharim, my Jerusalem is a black strimal and gray books, and daughter of Israel dressed modestly. All the signs on the streets say that. It's a whispering prayers for days to come. Not down here, but from up there. It winking to me, my Jerusalem. The young man at Nablus Gate had said, Nablus Gate, Sha'ar Shechem. That's also could be, it was behind the wall that separated West Jewish Jerusalem from Jordanian Jerusalem. Now it's in Israeli administered territory. The young man at Nablus Gate had said, my Jerusalem, it's a cross over a store and running feet. My sister who became an informer and policeman at midnight. Independence Parade with fisted hands. Yes, sir. What would you like, sir? Kebab or shashlik? Right? So this is the Christian Arab who has a sister who's an informant for the Israeli army. And what life is like now with this Christian Arab. Right? The Christian quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, that's around Nablus Gate. The soldier from Ashdod Yaakov, just one second. Ashdod Yaakov is, no, she doesn't say where that is. The soldier from Ashdod Yaakov had said, my Jerusalem, I have been there once on a morning of bereavement, an alley with a sniper at the left side of the tank's turret. I've never gone back. I simply cannot. Abner and Gadi, they are for me, my Jerusalem. Remember the 6 Day War, or before that, with that's how the soldier remembers Jerusalem. The first-year student had said, my Jerusalem is more homework and political science, looking for a room to rent, a friend, an exam, and on Thursday, a suitcase ready to go, run away back to the beach to my home. This is my Jerusalem. My Jerusalem is a busy campus full of good-looking girls, a weeping mother at the cemetery, an afternoon tea in a liberated hotel. Just one second, a liberated hotel. The Intercontinental Hotel that's on the top of the Mount of Olives. Okay, and sometimes you see that in some pictures of Jerusalem, like depending on where you see the golden dome of the Dome of the Rock. Behind it, on top of a hill, is a building with these huge arched windows. That's the Intercontinental Hotel. My Jerusalem is a busy campus full of good-looking girls, a weeping mother at the cemetery, an afternoon tea in a liberated hotel, another lottery at the Mivtar Hill, lovers at the Matzleva Valley, an echo of distant prayers at the Chorva Synagogue. My Jerusalem. So I just included this one because I think it's a beautiful understanding of what Israel is like now after the 6-Day War and who this population is and the different things that are going through people's minds in the city and in the country of Israel. And then there's this, which we'll end with, and then questions or comments. You and I and the Next War by Hanoch Levine. Hanoch Levine, from 1943-1999, was a prominent Israeli dramatist, theater director, author, and poet. From 67 to 70, Levine devoted himself to political satire. In March 68, he began working on a cabaret show entitled You, Me, and the Next War. The show was mounted in August 68 at the Bar Barim Club in Tel Aviv by students from the theater department at Tel Aviv University. Next, Levine wrote a satire called Ketchup. It was performed in the basement of the satirical cabaret in Tel Aviv in March 69. In these two works, Levine mocked Israeli military pathos and the parody Victory Parade for the 11-Minute War. The third play of this series, Bathtub Queen, performed at the Cameri Theater, was ended because of the public's negative reaction. Levine was indeed way too early for his time. In 67, Israel could not accept his work. So now let's read this poem. Hanoch Levine. When we go for a walk, there's always one more, you and I and the very next war. When we go to sleep, there's always one more, you and I and the very next war. You and I in the very next war, the next war coming to us for a blessing. You and I in the very next war, the one that will bring proper rest. When we smile at each other at the moment of love, the next war is smiling with us. When we are waiting at the delivery room, the next war is waiting with us. You and I, when they knock on the door, we are three. You and I and the next war. And when it's all over, we are again three. The next war, you and the picture. What's it a picture of? Him, because he's killed in the next war. Yeah. This is 1967. Nobody was feeling this way. Everybody is euphoric that this could be the war that ends all war. Now we've humiliated the Arabs. They have no choice but to come and make peace with us. Everybody should be thinking that. There should be no problem making peace with the Arabs now. Of course, that wasn't the problem, and this was a lone voice. Well, there are other people who had voice, but they were drowned out by everybody else who said, hey, let's celebrate for once. We won.
We were happy for the time.
We're happy until 1973. We'll look at poems from the Yom Kippur War next time. But this is prophetic. Right, but he's also thinking, you can never escape the next war. We don't have peace with the Arabs yet. That's what everybody was thinking. Nobody was thinking about Palestinians. It's thinking about Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. That's what people were thinking of. Because that Yasser Arafat was around, but there wasn't a PLO yet. PLO that was until 1969. This is pre-PLO. Nobody's talking Palestinians. Everybody's talking Arab countries. That's who we have to make peace with. And we haven't made peace yet, so there's going to be a next war. And no matter what we do, make love, smile, go to sleep, there's always a third person in the room, the next war.
Yeah, still that.
And now there is that third, yes, that's still the third person in the room, no matter how hard Israel has tried. So that's the first couple of decades of Israel in a nutshell with these couple of poems to get a sense of the transit camps with mass immigration. We have the Eichmann trial and dealing with the Holocaust as part of Israel's history, and the Six-Day War and reactions to it. Marie.
So when we look back at the poems we studied a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
with the bird,
Right.
really being this really wonderful imagination of freedom and joy and ultimate glory. And then the second poem was at the Silver Platter with the two children.
Right.
And the history has yet to be written.
Right.
And then these poems really reveal what happened.
Right.
And they're so, I guess I'm repeating myself from earlier, but they're so difficult. The times are so difficult.
That's right.
On a day-to-day level, on an individual interactive level, they could not take, they had to take the past with them with their tattoos. They couldn't
Right.
leave it.
That's
So
right.
they really had the freedom
Right.
in that generation.
Right.
And then the large struggles, the political struggles, and then just the day-to-day.
Absolutely.
Really something.
Every country has this. I mean, you read poetry of, I don't know, the blacks in South Africa. You read poetry of blacks in America. You read poetry of any persecuted minority in any country. It's going to sound the same, but the images and the symbolism is going to be different, unique to that culture. So the poetry of Israel is using the imagery of Judaism. And what is remarkable about it, just by all of us being Jews, that wow, that after 2,000 years of only knowing Israel from what we say in the prayer book, now it's come to life as a country. But now we're a country and we have to deal with real problems that every country has to deal with too. So now we have a diverse population because Mizrahi Jews look different than European Ashkenazi Jews. They're darker skinned. And so then there's that racism in the country. We'll look at poetry that responds to that as well. How the Mizrahi were always considered second-class citizens. They're the ones cleaning the streets and doing work like that, and always put down in the people who are getting the plum jobs and getting the promotions and were the members of parliament were all Ashkenazi Jews. So until Menachem Begin, who's an Ashkenazi Jew himself, when he won the prime ministership in the early 80s, that was a revolution for Mizrahis. So that was incredible. So it was only then that really people started to think about, what's Israel's responsibility here in dealing with these Mizrahi Jews? Is what they're dealing with Ethiopian Jews today still, right? So there you go, talking about Jews of a different color. The way the Ethiopian Jews, even the fact that the chief rabbinate first said they're not really Jewish, protests outside the chief rabbinate office until they backtracked and said, okay, they're Jewish. We won't make them go to the mikveh. That's what they wanted them to do that before. So a huge outcry in Israel about that. But there are no Ethiopian Jewish yeshivas in Israel. Ethiopian Jews are losing their culture because they have to go to Mizrahi or Ashkenazi yeshivas. So they're not really maintaining their Ethiopian Jewish culture to the next generation. So there's that. And then plus a whole myriad of other social issues that Israel has to deal with today that the poetry is responding to. So, it's more the Zionism I grew up with and the rah-rah Israel that I grew up with swept under the carpet all these things that nobody wanted to talk about because it just doesn't look good. You can't raise money on, we're not really treating the Mizrahi Jews too well. It's better to raise money and say, wow, look at the Weizmann Institute and look at the advancements in science and technology that Israel is making, right? So, that's the movement today at Israel at 70 is how is Israel living up to its potential? And is it right for us as American Jews to criticize Israel and about how they are dealing with their social issues, or do we stay in the background because we don't live there? Those are questions for the connection or lack thereof between American Jews and the state of Israel. Barbara.
On one of my trips to Israel in the early 70s, I went on convention with Women's American Ort. And Ort had a number of schools in Israel, which were basically trade schools that they were doing.
That's right. That's right. So Barbara's talking about trade schools of Ort. And my father, the second time we made Aliyah in 1972, got a job as a vice principal in the Ort High School in Ashkelon, and they're mainly Mizrahi students. That's right, it's a vocational school.
We went to,
right.
managed to get to all the schools.
Yes, yes, or a lot of them. You didn't go to all of them. There are lots of Ort schools. That would be quite the tour you would have been in Israel for at least a month, if not 2 months, to see every single Ort school. You saw a lot of them.
We saw a lot of there were a lot of schools, but we went to the Ort school.
Okay, right.
But every one of them, being that they were
vocational
schools, they were always in the poor side of
the
community.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's a problem that every country deals with. How do you deal with poverty? How do you get people out of poverty? It's what DC is dealing with, right? You don't have any upscale stuff across the Anacostia River in Southeast Washington, right? How do you get Southeast Washington to benefit from all the construction and all the money that's pouring into the rest of DC, right? And that's a major issue that DC is dealing with. So, and it's issues that Israel's dealing with as well. You have these development towns that were built specifically to get people out of the transit camps, and it ends up being towns that are impoverished, buildings that are really old, decrepit, and not much business there to attract the next generation to stay and to make improvements. So Israel is dealing with these social policy issues that every other country is too. All right, we'll continue the discussion next week. Have a good night.
Thank you.